First, we're going to start by taking off the shifter assembly. Most of this job is, I think, 12 and 14 millimeter sockets. If you have a little electric impact, it goes faster, but you could do it by hand also. That comes off pretty easily. Now we're going to take that. This needs to be loose. To get the tail housing off, this has to be loose. Fasteners aside.
All the bolts are the same lengths on the tripod trannies.
Oh yeah. All right. Good point. Now
right here you have a little spot. Put a flathead.
There's a pry point, and you want to be really careful. You do not lay this transmission down or do anything that'll separate this center part of the case from the front half, because then this job is way more complicated and you have to take the front of the transmission back apart. So make sure when you do this job you have it laying on its nose like that. The input shaft is protected by this piece of wood, because on a JZ bell housing it sticks out farther than the bell housing. On a 7M one it's taller. So all right, so right here he's taking that off. See, that just slides straight out. Now you've got these 3 shift rails, and this is your selector that your shifter's moving. And so what happens is, in shipping, sometimes I think this is probably the heaviest of all of them. So if the transmission gets bounced or moved in shipping, this can actually pop out of place. So all 3 of these shift rails, internal shift rails, have to be lined up in order to select 5th and reverse, 3rd and 4th, and 1 to 2. So if one of these pops out of place, now look what happens. You're stuck. You can't move it without being able to get the arm, the selector, into that location. And so that's what happens in shipping. So sometimes you have to remove the tail housing and pull it back into place like that. That way you can get into all the gears again. If this one's out of place, it's permanently stuck in, what is that? I don't know if that's 5th or reverse, but it's, you can't move it without taking it apart.
That'd be reverse.
That would be reverse, okay.
Yeah. So
now, if this does happen and it's like in the car already, one trick is to remove the reverse switch, and you'll see there's a little ramp in there. I don't know if you can see it. Go ahead and move this. And if you push on that ramp carefully, you can pop that back into place sometimes without having to take the whole tail housing off, and get these all lined up again. So we showed you how to take the tail housing off on the newer model transmissions. Here's one of the older transmissions from a MK3 Supra. One thing to consider before you start taking the tail housing off is there's 2 different length bolts. You've got one longer bolt here on this transmission, and right next to that longer bolt you've got a Torx fastener, and inside there is a detent ball and spring. You want to be sure that you take this out and let that spring and ball come out before you start removing this tail housing, because if you don't, when you go to pull this off, this ball can fall down inside the transmission, which is going to be a nightmare. And then when you go to put it back together, the spring will push the shift rail or shift rod out of whack, and then it won't shift when you put it all back together. It's not going to work properly. Now we are going to show you putting this tail housing back on. Also want to mention the silicone, you need to clean that off. Usually we just use a razor blade, being careful not to gouge it. Clean this off real good, and when you put your sealant back on there, you want to do, you know, a small bead. It's probably 1/8 of an inch. It doesn't need a ton, and you want to go to the inside of each of the holes as you go around. Now this shift rod, when you're going to put the tail housing back on, you want to just kind of set in there like that, and you want to make sure that all 3 of these are lined up evenly before you start this process. So you're going to line that up with the hole in the tail housing, being careful not to push those shift rails out of place. And when you get it part way down, then you're going to drop your new arm on there, and you're going to line it up through the output shaft hole so you can kind of see how everything goes. And then be careful as you push it down that, you know, you don't feel any of those shift rails pop out of place.